March 17, 1943. 0347 hours. North Atlantic, 520 nautical miles southwest of Iceland. Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Weber pressed his eye against the periscope lens of U-257, sweeping the horizon through sheets of driving rain. What he saw made his blood run cold. Where intelligence had promised a lightly defended convoy of 40 merchant ships with perhaps 6 or 7 escorts, his targeting calculations now counted something impossible. 40 destroyers, corvettes, and frigates formed concentric rings around the merchantman, a moving fortress of steel that transformed the hunter into the hunted. In that moment, Weber realized the war beneath the waves had fundamentally changed. The Wolfpack tactics that had brought Britain to the edge of starvation were about to meet a defensive innovation that would turn the Atlantic into a graveyard for U-boats. The defensive revolution that would doom the U-boat arm had begun 8 months earlier, in the cramped operations room of Western Approaches Command in Liverpool. On July 23, 1942, Admiral Sir Max Horton had studied the monthly loss reports with growing alarm. June 1942 had seen 144 Allied merchant ships totaling 700,236 tons sent to the bottom. The mathematics were unsustainable. Britain was losing ships faster than American shipyards could replace them. Horton's solution contradicted 2 years of convoy doctrine. Traditional convoy theory, developed during the First World War and refined through 1940 to 1941, held that escorts should be distributed across multiple convoys. A typical North Atlantic convoy in early 1942 sailed with 4 to 8 escorts protecting 30 to 50 merchant ships. Naval planners believed this distributed defense maximized coverage across the vital supply routes. But Horton had identified a fatal flaw in this thinking. U-boat Wolfpack tactics, perfected by Gross Admiral Karl Donatz's staff, concentrated 15 to 20 submarines against single convoys. The distributed escort strategy meant that no convoy had sufficient defensive depth to counter massed submarine attacks. The solution required a complete reversal of accepted doctrine. On August 12, 1942, Horton issued Western Approaches Directive 247. Convoy defense shall be concentrated rather than distributed. Better that some convoys sail with minimal escort while others receive overwhelming protection than that all convoys remain vulnerable to Wolfpack tactics. The transformation would require unprecedented coordination between British, Canadian, and American naval forces. The first experimental super-escort deployment sailed with convoy HX-229A on September 3, 1942. Naval records show 22 escort vessels protected 38 merchantmen, nearly a 1-to-2 ratio of warships to cargo vessels. The convoy commodore, Rear Admiral Jonathan Ashworth, documented his initial skepticism. This concentration of escorts seems wasteful of resources. Surely these vessels would be better distributed across multiple convoys. Events would prove otherwise. U-boat command, monitoring Allied radio traffic through B-Dienst cryptographic intelligence, had positioned Wolfpack Lionheart, with 17 submarines across HX-229A's projected route. The resulting engagement would validate or condemn Horton's revolutionary concept. September 8, 1942, 2,230 hours. U-618, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Ernst Hartmann, achieved initial contact with HX-229A. Standard Wolfpack doctrine called for the contact boat to shadow while transmitting homing signals for other pack members. Hartmann's war diary, recovered from German naval archives after the war, recorded his surprise: radar detection at 18 kilometers. Forced to dive before achieving attack position. Surfaced after 2 hours. Radar contact immediate. Force deep again. Cannot maintain contact. What Hartmann had encountered was the first layer of Horton's defensive concept, a radar picket line of 4 destroyers equipped with Type 271 surface search radar, positioned 15 to 20 kilometers ahead of the main convoy. These picket ships detected surfaced U-boats before the submarines could spot the convoy, forcing them underwater where their speed advantage vanished. The defensive revolution had begun. The Wolfpack Lowenhers discovered that penetrating HX-229A's defenses required tactics no U-boat crew had trained for. Traditional approach methods, surface night attacks exploiting superior surface speed, or submerged daylight approaches using hydrophone tracking, encountered layered obstacles that multiplied with each failed attempt. The outer defensive ring, positioned 15 to 20 kilometers from the merchant ships, consisted of 8 destroyers equipped with Type 271 radar and high-frequency direction-finding equipment. These vessels detected not only surfaced U-boats but also their radio transmissions. U-524, attempting to send position reports to coordinate the Wolfpack, found itself under depth charge attack within minutes of transmitting. Corvette Captain Hans Forster's patrol report, filed after his return to Lorient on September 24, noted, British direction-finding capability has improved dramatically. Any radio transmission brings immediate counterattack. Wolfpack coordination becoming impossible. The middle defensive layer proved even more lethal. 12 corvettes and frigates formed a ring 8 to 12 kilometers from the convoy center, close enough to respond to radar contacts within minutes. These vessels carried the new Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, a forward-throwing weapon that launched 24 contact-fused projectiles in an elliptical pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike depth charges, which had to pass over the submarine before detonating, Hedgehog allowed continuous sonar contact throughout the attack. U-431, commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Wilhelm Dahms, became the first victim of this weapon on September 10. British corvette HMS Loosestrife, under Lieutenant Commander Harold Stonehouse, detected U-431 at 4,200 yards while the submarine attempted a submerged approach. The engagement lasted 17 minutes. Stonehouse's action report, preserved in Admiralty records, documented the attack sequence, obtained firm ASTIC contact bearing 275 degrees, range 4,000 yards. Increased speed to 15 knots for Hedgehog attack. First pattern fired at 400 yards. 1 detonation observed. Target echo lost. Heavy oil slick and debris surfacing. U-boat presumed destroyed. Dahms and his crew of 46 had no chance to surface or abandon ship. The Hedgehog's contact fuse meant the weapon only exploded upon striking the submarine's pressure hull, a detonation that punctured the hull and sent U-431 plummeting to the ocean floor in seconds. The inner defensive ring created the final killing zone. 8 destroyers sailed within 3 to 5 kilometers of the merchantman, close enough to provide immediate protection against any U-boat that penetrated the outer layers. These vessels carried full-depth charge loadings, between 70 and 100 charges per ship, and maintained continuous ASTIC sweeps. By September 12, Wolfpack Lowenhers had lost 4 submarines, U-431, U-608, U-756, and U-617, without achieving a single torpedo hit against HX-229A's merchant ships. The remaining 13 U-boats received orders from BDU, U-boat headquarters, to break off the attack. Donut's War Diary entry for September 12 acknowledged the new reality: enemy convoy defense has reached intensity that makes successful attacks impossible without unacceptable losses. Must develop new tactics or face destruction of U-boat force. The impact of super-escort convoys extended far beyond tactical defeats. German U-boat command had built its entire strategic concept on favorable loss ratios, the calculation that each U-boat lost would sink enough tonnage to justify the sacrifice. By October 1942, this mathematics had inverted catastrophically. Convoy SC-107, sailing from Nova Scotia on October 24, 1942, carried 42 merchant ships protected by 35 escort vessels. Wolfpack Veilchen, Violet, with 19 U-boats, intercepted the convoy on October 30. The resulting 8-day battle became a watershed in the Atlantic campaign. German naval records show 7 U-boats destroyed, U-132, U-520, U-442, U-658, U-272, U-381, and U-409, while only 4 merchant ships were sunk totaling 31,000 tons. The exchange ratio had reversed completely. Where 1941 operations saw U-boats sink 12 to 15 ships per submarine lost, SC-107 demonstrated that concentrated escorts could destroy multiple submarines while losing minimal tonnage. The psychological impact on U-boat crews proved as devastating as the material losses. Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Surin, one of Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders, filed a patrol report after attempting to attack Convoy on 154 in December 1942 that revealed spreading demoralization, approached Convoy surface at night as doctrine requires. Detected by radar at 16 kilometers. Forced to dive. Attempted submerged approach. Detected by ASTIC at 5 kilometers. Depth charged for 4 hours. Sustained minor damage. Surfaced after dark. Immediately detected again. The enemy appears to see in complete darkness and hear through any ocean noise. Crew morale deteriorating. Request return to base for equipment upgrades. No equipment upgrades could restore the tactical balance. The super-escort convoys carried enough warships to maintain continuous hunting pressure. While traditional escort groups had to choose between protecting the convoy and pursuing detected submarines, the concentrated forces could do both simultaneously. Outer ring vessels could pursue contacts to destruction while inner ring ships maintained protection. U-boat training doctrine, developed when escorts were scarce, had prepared crews for brief encounters followed by escape and renewed attacks. Super-escort convoys transformed every contact into a sustained hunt. British and Canadian destroyer commanders developed creeping attack tactics, maintaining sonar contact for hours while systematically dropping depth charge patterns that forced U-boats deeper until their batteries exhausted or their hulls collapsed under pressure. The psychological warfare extended to German U-boat bases in France. Returning crews spoke of convoys they couldn't approach, of radar that detected periscopes, of ASTIC that tracked every movement, of depth charges that pursued them for hours. New crews, arriving for their first patrols, heard stories that contradicted their training. The confident aggression of 1940 to 1941 gave way to defensive caution that reduced effectiveness even when tactical opportunities existed. By January 1943, U-boat command faced a crisis that transcended tactics or technology. The super-escort convoys had created psychological conditions where U-boat crews increasingly focused on survival rather than attack, a fundamental shift that eroded the offensive spirit essential to submarine warfare. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. German naval intelligence recognized that countering super-escort convoys required technological innovation, not just tactical adjustments. In November 1942, Gross Admiral Dönitz convened an emergency conference at U-boat headquarters in Paris, bringing together submarine commanders, naval engineers, and scientists from the Kriegsmarine's Technical Development Branch. The resulting crash program, designated Program Whale program, attempted to develop countermeasures to Allied detection systems. On December 8, 1942, the first acoustic torpedoes entered service. The T-5 Zonkennig, Ren, homed on the propeller noise of escort vessels, theoretically allowing U-boats to eliminate screening ships before attacking the convoy. U-305, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Rudolf Bahr, carried 4 T-5 torpedoes when it sailed from Brest on January 12, 1943. His patrol orders directed him to target convoy HX-223, intelligence reports indicating 48 merchant ships with 38 escorts. The engagement on January 19 would test whether technology could restore German tactical advantage. Bahr's war diary, recovered from German archives, documented the attempt, 2,245 hours. Detected convoy at 22 kilometers. Multiple radar contacts. Submerged approach impossible, too many escorts pinging actively. Decided to fire T-5 from maximum range, 5,000 meters, at destroyer on outer screen. Torpedo running time 4 minutes. At 3 minutes 30 seconds, massive explosion observed. Destroyer appears damaged, slowing. British records confirm HMS Beverly, a Town-class destroyer, suffered torpedo damage that night. But the T-5's success proved Pyrrhic. The acoustic signature that guided the torpedo to its target also revealed the U-boat's position. Within 8 minutes of firing, U-305 found itself under coordinated attack from 3 corvettes that had triangulated the torpedo's launch point through hydrophone bearings. The depth charging lasted 5 hours. Bar recorded, 0347 hours. Battery power at 18%. Hull leaks in forward torpedo room. 3 men injured. Depth charges continue. Cannot surface, radar will detect immediately. Cannot remain submerged, batteries failing. The super-escort tactics have eliminated all options. U-305 survived by lying motionless on the ocean floor at 180 meters depth, beyond the maximum effective range of British depth charges set for 150 meters. After 13 hours underwater, Barr surfaced 60 kilometers from the convoy and limped back to Brest. His patrol report concluded, T-5 weapon effective against individual targets but reveals submarine position. Against super-escort convoys, any attack brings overwhelming counterforce. Recommend withdrawal from North Atlantic routes until technological parity restored. The Kriegsmarine's technical branch also developed radar detector equipment, the Naxos receiver and later the more sophisticated Borkum system, that warned U-boats when Allied radar swept their position. These devices, installed fleet-wide by February 1943, provided tactical warning but offered no solution to the fundamental problem. Super-escort convoys had enough ships to maintain continuous surveillance that made successful attacks nearly impossible regardless of detection technology. By March 1943, German U-boat losses reached catastrophic levels. 43 submarines were destroyed that month, most attempting to attack heavily escorted convoys. The technological arms race had failed to restore German tactical advantage against the brute force of concentrated escort vessels. May 1943 became the month that broke the U-boat offensive permanently. Naval historians later termed it Black May, a period when the mathematics of attrition turned decisively and irreversibly against Germany. The super-escort convoy system, refined through 8 months of operations, achieved its designed purpose, making U-boat operations unsustainable. Convoy ONS-5, departing Liverpool on April 22, 1943, represented the culmination of Allied defensive doctrine. 43 merchant ships sailed under protection of 42 escorts, a ratio that would have seemed fantastical 18 months earlier. The escort commander, Commander Peter Gretton aboard HMS Duncan, had organized his forces into 5 concentric rings with overlapping radar and sonar coverage extending 30 kilometers in all directions. 41 U-boats from groups Specht, Amsel, and Drossel, Woodpecker, Blackbird, and Thrush, concentrated against ONS-5 between April 28 and May 6. The resulting battle demonstrated the complete futility of Wolfpack tactics against concentrated escorts. German Naval High Command records show the devastating outcome: 13 U-boats destroyed, U-438, U-531, U-630, U-270, U-192, U-638, U-125, U-258, U-209, U-528, U-264, U-273, and U-266. Merchant ships sunk, 12 totaling 61,000 tons. The exchange ratio had become catastrophic. 13 submarines and approximately 650 trained submariners lost to sink 12 cargo ships, a ratio that no military force could sustain. More telling, the 42 escorts suffered only minor damage. The defensive system had proven itself not just effective but overwhelming. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner, commanding U-415, survived the ONS-5 battle. His memoir, written decades later, captured the hopelessness U-boat crews experienced. We approached the convoy knowing we were attacking our own deaths. The escorts were everywhere. Radar found us the moment we surfaced. Sonar tracked us when we dove. The ocean had become transparent to them while we remained blind. Men who had laughed at danger in 1941 now looked at each other with the eyes of condemned prisoners. The psychological breaking point came not just from casualties but from futility. U-boat crews could accept death if their sacrifice achieved strategic purpose. But dying without effect, being hunted and destroyed without even reaching attack positions, created a different kind of despair that spread through the U-boat service like a contagion. On May 24, 1943, Gross Admiral Dönitz made the decision that acknowledged defeat in the Atlantic. His directive to all U-boat commanders read, "The overwhelming superiority of enemy escort forces, particularly in the North Atlantic, makes continued operations in these waters impossible with acceptable losses. All boats are to withdraw from North Atlantic convoy routes and reposition to less heavily defended areas." The withdrawal represented complete strategic failure. Germany's U-boat force, built to strangle Britain's supply lines, had been driven from the decisive theater of operations. The super-escort convoys, massing 40 or more warships around merchant fleets, had achieved what seemed impossible in 1940, making the North Atlantic safe for Allied shipping despite the presence of hundreds of German submarines. The withdrawal from North Atlantic convoy routes in May 1943 created cascading strategic consequences that extended far beyond submarine warfare. The super-escort convoy system had not merely defeated German U-boats, it had secured the logistical foundation for Allied victory in Europe. With the U-boat threat neutralized in the North Atlantic, Allied convoy statistics for June through December 1943 revealed the transformation. Monthly merchant ship losses dropped from an average of 96 ships in the first 5 months of 1943 to just 23 ships monthly for the remainder of the year. More critically, tonnage delivered to Britain increased by 340% compared to the same period in 1942. This logistical security enabled operations that would have been impossible under sustained U-boat pressure. The Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943 required moving 478,000 troops and 1.8 million tons of supplies across waters that had been U-boat hunting grounds months earlier. Operation Husky proceeded without significant submarine interference, a reality that would have seemed impossible in 1942. The super-escort convoys also transformed the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. Between June and December 1943, American bombers based in Britain increased sortie rates by 285%, enabled by uninterrupted delivery of aviation fuel, bombs, and spare parts across the Atlantic. The 8th Air Force consumed 30,000 tons of supplies monthly by year's end, tonnage that could only reach Britain because super-escort convoys had made the Atlantic crossing routine rather than perilous. German strategic planning documents, captured after the war, revealed how thoroughly the U-boat defeat affected their defensive calculations. A Wehrmacht High Command assessment dated September 15, 1943, acknowledged, Allied ability to move unlimited supplies across the Atlantic has fundamentally altered the strategic balance. Enemy can now accumulate forces and materials for invasion of Western Europe without meaningful interdiction. The failure to maintain pressure on Atlantic convoy routes may prove the decisive factor in the war's outcome. The human cost of achieving this strategic victory remains sobering. Allied navies lost 175 escort vessels, destroyers, corvettes, and frigates, killed in action protecting convoys between September 1942 and May 1943. These ships carried crews of 150 to 300 men each, representing approximately 35,000 sailors who died establishing the super-escort system that broke the U-boat offensive. The German toll proved even more catastrophic. Of the 1,162 U-boats commissioned during the war, 785 were destroyed, a loss rate of 67.6%. Approximately 30,000 German submariners died, representing 75% of all men who served in U-boats. The majority of these losses occurred between September 1942 and May 1944, the period when super-escort convoys dominated the Atlantic. The super-escort convoy system demonstrated a fundamental principle of industrial warfare: concentrated force multiplies effectiveness exponentially rather than linearly. 40 escorts protecting one convoy proved vastly more effective than distributing those same 40 ships across 5 convoys with 8 escorts each. This principle, concentration of force at the decisive point, would influence naval doctrine for generations. By December 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had effectively ended as a contest that might determine the war's outcome. The super-escort convoys had won. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The super-escort convoy system's success drove innovations that would reshape naval warfare for decades beyond World War II. The concentrated defensive formations required unprecedented coordination between multiple naval services, nationalities, and vessel types, challenges that forced development of command and control systems fundamentally different from traditional naval operations. The most significant innovation emerged from the Tactical Coordination Center concept, first implemented aboard escort group flagships in January 1943. Commander Donald McIntyre, commanding the 5th Escort Group, established the prototype aboard HMS Hesperus. His operations room featured a massive plotting table where operators tracked every escort vessel, merchant ship, and detected submarine contact in real time using information from radar, sonar, radio direction finding, and visual reports. This centralized coordination allowed escort commanders to direct 40 vessels as a single integrated weapon system rather than independent units. When sonar detected a submarine, the tactical coordinator could vector the 3 nearest escorts to prosecute the contact while maintaining defensive coverage elsewhere. Royal Navy records show this coordination reduced average time from submarine detection to attack commencement from 23 minutes in late 1942 to just 7 minutes by May 1943. The communications infrastructure required to support super-escort operations drove rapid advancement in naval radio technology. Traditional convoy operations used high-frequency radio for ship-to-ship communication, but concentrating 40 warships in close proximity created interference problems that rendered standard equipment inadequate. The British Admiralty Signal Establishment developed the Type 86 VHF radio system specifically for super-escort groups, entering service in March 1943. This short-range, high-frequency system allowed instantaneous voice communication between all escorts without the atmospheric interference that plagued HF radio. Escort commanders could issue tactical orders in real time rather than relying on signal flags or encoded radio messages. German naval intelligence, intercepting these communications, noted in April 1943 reports, British escorts demonstrate coordination unprecedented in naval warfare. They function as single organism rather than collection of individual ships. Our tactical doctrine has no counter to this level of integration. The super-escort system also revolutionized anti-submarine training. The Royal Navy established the Western Approaches Tactical Unit in Liverpool in January 1943, where escort crews trained using elaborate simulations of super-escort operations. The facility featured a massive floor plan representing 10 square kilometers of ocean, where teams maneuvered ship models representing complete escort groups against submarine threats controlled by experienced U-boat commanders serving as instructors. This tactical training, combined with standardized operating procedures developed through combat experience, meant that escort vessels from different nations and ship classes could integrate seamlessly into super-escort formations. A Canadian corvette, British destroyer, and American destroyer escort could operate as a coordinated team within hours of joining a convoy, something impossible with earlier ad hoc escort arrangements. The Americans adopted super-escort principles for Pacific operations against Japanese submarines, though the threat level never approached Atlantic intensity. Hunter-killer groups, escort carriers surrounded by 8 to 12 destroyer escorts, used concentrated force principles to hunt Japanese submarines with devastating effectiveness. Between March 1943 and August 1945, these groups destroyed 47 Japanese submarines while losing only 3 escort vessels. Post-war analysis by both Allied and German naval staff colleges concluded that super-escort tactics represented the most significant naval innovation of the war after aircraft carriers. The principle of overwhelming concentrated force applied to defensive operations provided a template that influenced Cold War anti-submarine warfare doctrine, modern carrier battlegroup organization, and contemporary naval convoy operations. The technological and tactical innovations born from super-escort operations demonstrated that numerical superiority, properly coordinated and concentrated, could overcome tactical excellence and technological sophistication. 40 escort ships, functioning as an integrated defensive system, proved unstoppable by any submarine force regardless of skill or determination. Behind the tactical innovations and strategic consequences stood individual sailors whose experiences defined the human reality of super-escort convoy operations. The concentration of 40 warships around each convoy meant that thousands of men operated in close proximity for weeks at a time under conditions of constant stress and periodic terror. Lieutenant Commander Robert Atkinson, commanding HMS Keppel in the 3rd Escort Group, maintained a detailed personal diary throughout 1943. His entries, donated to the Imperial War Museum after his death in 1987, provide intimate perspective on super-escort operations. March 15, 1943 entry reads, 18th consecutive day at sea. Convoy HX-229 has 37 escorts. I can see 12 other ships from the bridge at any moment. The ocean feels crowded. Yet every man aboard knows that despite our numbers, one torpedo could send us to the bottom in minutes. The presence of so many other ships provides psychological comfort more than actual protection. We protect the convoy, nothing protects us except our own vigilance. The psychological toll of extended operations manifested differently than traditional combat stress. Psychiatrists assigned to Western Approaches Command documented what they termed escort exhaustion syndrome in reports from May 1943. Unlike the acute trauma of single catastrophic events, escort crews experienced cumulative stress from weeks of interrupted sleep, constant alertness, and the knowledge that submarine attack could come at any moment without warning. Medical records from escort vessel crews show that by late 1943, the average sailor in super-escort groups operated under conditions of chronic sleep deprivation. Watch schedules required 4 hours on duty followed by 4 hours off, repeated continuously for convoy passages lasting 2 to 3 weeks. Action stations alarms, summoning entire crews to combat posts, occurred an average of 4.3 times per 24-hour period according to Royal Navy statistical analysis. Able seaman Thomas Greenwood, serving aboard corvette HMS Campanula, wrote letters home that capture the exhausting routine. His letter dated April 7, 1943, preserved in family archives. Mother, I cannot remember when I last slept for more than 3 hours at once. When the alarm sounds, we run to our stations not knowing if this is practice or if a torpedo is already in the water heading for us. Sometimes we fight submarines for hours. Other times the alarm was a whale or a school of fish that fooled the sonar. But we respond every time with the same urgency because we never know. The fatigue goes deeper than tiredness. It settles into your bones. The concentrated escort formations created unusual social dynamics. Ships operating within visual range for weeks developed informal rivalries and friendships between crews. Escort commanders established radio networks for non-tactical communication during quiet periods, where ships exchanged weather observations, mechanical problems, and simple conversation. These networks, monitored and transcribed by radio operators, reveal the human connections that sustain morale. One transcribed exchange from March 21, 1943, between HMS Vedette and HMCS Skeena illustrates this camaraderie. Vedette to Skeena, that was impressive depth charge work on that contact 2 hours ago. What's your baker preparing for dinner tonight? Skeena to Vedette, boiled beef and cabbage, same as every night for 26 consecutive days. Our baker says when we reach port, he's opening a restaurant that serves anything except beef and cabbage. Vedette to Skeena, your baker can open that restaurant next to the pub I'm buying. First round on me for everyone who survived this bloody convoy. These human connections, formed under extreme stress, maintained through exhaustion, tested by combat, created bonds that super-escort veterans carried throughout their lives. Post-war reunions of escort groups drew hundreds of attendees annually through the 1990s, men who had protected convoys together seeking the companionship of those who understood their experience. The full historical significance of super-escort convoys becomes clear only when examined through the lens of what they prevented rather than merely what they achieved. Military historians conducting post-war analysis concluded that without the defensive revolution of concentrated escorts, the Allied strategic position in 1943 to 1944 would have been fundamentally untenable. German naval archives, open to researchers after reunification, revealed contingency plans based on continued U-boat effectiveness. A Kriegsmarine strategic assessment from February 1943, written weeks before the ONS-5 battle, projected that maintaining 1942 sinking rates would reduce British food imports to crisis levels by September 1943 and force indefinite postponement of any cross-channel invasion. The document concluded, if current trends continue, Britain may seek negotiated settlement by year's end. These projections rested on assumptions invalidated by super-escort tactics. Instead of 700,000 tons of Allied shipping lost monthly as German planners expected, actual losses from June 1943 onward averaged 123,000 tons, an 82% reduction that transformed strategic calculations. Britain's food stocks, which had dropped to critically low levels in spring 1943, recovered to sustainable levels by autumn specifically because super-escort convoys ensured steady supply deliveries. The economic impact extended beyond immediate military considerations. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey calculated that each month of extended war would have cost an additional 250,000 military and civilian lives across all theaters. By shortening the war, securing the logistics for invasion of Europe in 1944 rather than 1945 or later, super-escort convoys saved an estimated 500,000 to 750,000 lives according to demographic studies published in the 1960s. The financial cost of implementing super-escort doctrine proved staggering by contemporary standards yet economically rational. Building and operating 40 escort vessels per convoy required approximately $180 million in 1943 dollars per month for the North Atlantic route alone. However, each month of delayed Allied victory cost roughly $8 billion in combined military expenditure, making super-escort operations extraordinarily cost-effective despite their enormous absolute expense. The human cost of the Atlantic battle, concentrated in the period of super-escort development and implementation, remains sobering. Allied escort forces lost approximately 36,000 sailors killed in action during the entire Atlantic campaign, with roughly 22,000 dying between September 1942 and May 1943, the crucible period when super-escort doctrine was forged through trial, error, and sacrifice. German U-boat forces suffered approximately 30,000 killed from all causes during the war, with 18,000 dying after September 1942 when super-escort tactics made U-boat operations increasingly suicidal. The strategic lessons from super-escort convoy operations influenced naval doctrine through the remainder of the 20th century and into the 21st. The principle of concentrated force at decisive points became foundational to NATO anti-submarine warfare doctrine during the Cold War. Modern carrier strike groups, with their multiple escort vessels providing layered defense, directly descend from super-escort tactical concepts developed in the North Atlantic between 1942 and 1943. The story of what German U-boat captains faced when Allied convoys deployed 40 escort ships is ultimately a story about industrial capacity, tactical innovation, and the mathematics of concentrated force. It demonstrates that in modern warfare, numerical superiority properly organized and coordinated can overcome tactical excellence, technological sophistication, and individual courage. The U-boat commanders who faced these super-escort formations were among the most skilled submariners in naval history, commanding technologically advanced vessels and demonstrating consistent bravery. Yet they faced a defensive system that rendered their skills, technology, and courage ultimately irrelevant. The 40 escort ships that surrounded Allied convoys in 1943 represented more than simple numerical advantage. They embodied a revolution in defensive warfare, proof that concentrated force, enabled by industrial capacity and coordinated through tactical innovation, could create conditions of overwhelming superiority that no amount of enemy skill or determination could overcome. In the end, the U-boats did not lose because they failed, but because they faced an enemy who had learned to make failure inevitable. The transformation from distributed to concentrated convoy defense between 1942 and 1943 offers lessons that transcend naval warfare and speak to fundamental principles of strategy, resource allocation, and organizational adaptation under existential pressure. Modern military analysts studying the super-escort revolution identify patterns that appeared again in conflicts from Vietnam to the Persian Gulf. The first lesson concerns the danger of distributed resources against concentrated threats. Allied naval commanders initially believed that spreading escorts across multiple convoys maximized protective coverage. This logic seemed sound: more convoys protected meant more supply lines secured. Yet this distributed approach allowed German Wolfpacks to concentrate overwhelming force against any single convoy, achieving local superiority despite overall Allied numerical advantage. Admiral Horton's insight, that concentration trumps distribution when facing massed attacks, contradicted institutional wisdom but proved mathematically sound. 40 escorts protecting one convoy could establish defensive depth impossible for U-boats to penetrate. 8 escorts protecting 5 convoys left each vulnerable to Wolfpack concentration. The lesson appeared again in air defense doctrine: better to provide overwhelming protection for critical targets than inadequate defense for everything. The second lesson addresses technological adaptation and tactical innovation. German U-boat forces possessed technological sophistication and tactical expertise forged through 3 years of successful operations. Their commanders were among the finest submarine officers in naval history. Yet they faced an Allied system that rendered their expertise increasingly irrelevant through industrial capacity and organizational innovation. The super-escort convoys succeeded not through individual technological superiority but through systematic integration of multiple capabilities: radar detection, sonar tracking, radio direction finding, hedgehog weapons, and tactical coordination centers. Each component provided incremental advantage. Combined into coordinated systems, they created overwhelming superiority. Modern military doctrine calls this system of systems warfare, the lesson that integrated capabilities exceed the sum of individual parts. The third lesson concerns psychological dimensions of industrial warfare. U-boat crews in 1943 faced the same ocean, operated the same submarines, and possessed the same training as their 1941 predecessors. Yet their effectiveness collapsed because they confronted a tactical reality that made success impossible regardless of skill or courage. The psychological impact of fighting unwinnable battles proved as decisive as material losses. This pattern repeated in later conflicts. North Vietnamese forces facing B-52 arc light bombing, Iraqi forces confronting coalition air power in 1991, and Taliban fighters engaging drone strikes all experienced similar psychological erosion when tactical reality rendered individual courage insufficient for survival. The lesson remains relevant: when technology and tactics create conditions where valor cannot overcome material disadvantage, morale collapses regardless of ideological commitment. The fourth lesson addresses institutional adaptation speed. The Allied transition from distributed to concentrated escort doctrine required 8 months from concept to full implementation, remarkably rapid for organizational change involving multiple nations, services, and industrial bases. This adaptation succeeded because senior leadership recognized existential stakes and granted commanders authority to implement radical solutions without bureaucratic delay. Contemporary military organizations study this adaptation as a model for wartime transformation. The combination of clear strategic necessity, empowered operational commanders, and industrial capacity to implement new doctrine created conditions for revolutionary change at speeds peacetime institutions rarely achieve. The lesson suggests that organizational flexibility under pressure may matter as much as technological capability. The final lesson concerns the mathematics of attrition. Super-escort convoys succeeded ultimately because they reversed casualty ratios to unsustainable levels for Germany. When each U-boat destroyed cost more in trained personnel and industrial capacity than the tonnage it sank, the strategic calculation became simple arithmetic leading to inevitable defeat. This brutal mathematics, making enemy operations cost more than they achieve, remains foundational to modern military strategy. The 40 escort ships that surrounded Atlantic convoys in 1943 represent more than historical curiosity. They embody principles of concentration, integration, adaptation, and industrial warfare that continue shaping military thought 8 decades later. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.